Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, Compass. Welcome to session 5. Bear with me here 1 second. We're going to be talking today about active listening and feedback, better known as performance management. So for all of us on this journey, we are now at the second half of the program. And as we spoke in the beginning, we were talking about awareness, communication, and implementation. Well, we've gone through various skill sets now, and now is the time to implement the skills that we've learned into our business. Going into these next several sessions, what I want you guys to go in with the mindset of is, how can I use this in my business today? And ultimately, as you're embarking on any kind of new journey, it's going to be uncomfortable. Your mind is going to tell you that you don't need to do this and that you just continue to do things the way that you are. And I think we all need to be grounded in the reality that, as my favorite Jim Rohn saying goes, for things to change for us, we have to change. So the question is how are you willing to change? How are you willing to show up differently for yourself, your team members, and your clients? This is it, guys. Skills and implementation. Who's ready to take the leap? Drop a yes in the chat box. David?
Thank you, Chirag. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Glad to be with you again. Today's roadmap has 2 important points we want to be focusing on. First is active listening skills. How do we apply the active listening skills to have better conversations so we can solve problems and improve productivity on the team? That's the first part of what we'll be talking about today. Secondly, we want to really start applying the feedback skills that we'll be giving you today to the performance management discussion and process. So if you've been waiting for performance management to kind of come into focus here, this is the time when we're going to really start bringing it into focus, because we've been talking about emotional intelligence and listening. The one more piece that we need to discuss a little bit here is feedback, and we're going to jump right into performance management. Chirag?
And what we wanted to do in typical Compass fashion is leave a section called Learning from Reality. What we want to do is we introduce combining the skills that we've learned from emotional intelligence and active listening and applying them to performance management. We want to leave adequate time today to hear your questions. So for everyone on today, we'll all have a chance to ask questions. There'll be multiple different Q&A points. And in the end, we'll be bringing on live participants and in a different way. The last few times we've had somebody prepped, but this time we're going to be picking people out of the chat box based on the questions they have that are most relevant. So we're going to leave 10 to 15 minutes for that in the end. So let's just dive in.
Active listening skill set. I really want to emphasize that what we're talking about here is possibly, or more likely, most probably, the most important skill that you can develop for success in your business. We often think about selling as selling. We don't often think about selling as listening. But selling is always a response to what we perceive in the client, or in this case, with our teammates. Active listening skills are the thing that you need to bring your attention to, focus on, and build skills in as much as anything else in your business. The way that you make people feel seen, heard, and valued is through how you listen, not how you speak. So for those of you who spend most of your lives thinking about how you're going to say this or say that, let's spend time today focusing about how you're going to apply listening skills to the situations that are in front of you. We said last time we talked about the listening mindset. Today we're going to focus on the listening skill set that goes along with that. The listening mindset, as you may recall, had 3 things: meet them where they are, stay with them as long as you need them, as they need you to be there, and third, get it all and get it right. This is really hard to do because most of our lives are revolving around what we want, what we need. Listening, of course, is all about helping someone else solve their problems, understanding what they need, and being in service to that. That's what you do with your clients. That's what you need to do with your teammates as well. So we're going to give you 5 skills that you can apply, and the real kind of artistry in this is applying the 5 skills in a combined way that leaves people feeling powerfully affected, powerfully seen, heard, and valued. Think for a moment about a time when you thought you needed someone to listen to you and they weren't there. Maybe it was something in your business life and you were really struggling with something and you needed their help. Or maybe it was your personal life, something that happened to you. Maybe it was a physical or a kind of health diagnosis or something in your relationship with somebody. and you turned to somebody in your life, maybe a friend or a business colleague, and you needed them to hear you at that time and they were not there. Maybe they were saying, but you could tell their attention was somewhere else. Or maybe you needed to talk something through for 10 or 15 minutes and they kind of left you after 2-3 minutes. They were there with you for a couple of minutes and then kind of their attention went somewhere else. Try to remember how that felt for you. In contrast, think of a time when you really needed somebody to be there for you and they were. Maybe it was a business situation, maybe it was a home situation. You needed their support, you needed to be heard, you needed to perhaps be validated, you needed to get something off your chest where you could say, I finally recognize that somebody understands me. Somebody is willing to be here with me as I need them to be here. And how powerful an experience that was. You've often heard the expression, people will never remember what you said or what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. This is all about listening, folks. It's really, really crucial to your success in business and in life. 5 specific skills that we want you to practice every day for the rest of your life to create powerful impacts on others in your business and your personal life. It corresponds to the last part of the listening mindset. Remember, the last part of the listening mindset was do everything you can to get it all and get it right. That means get it all, means getting the whole story, understanding the whole breadth of what's happening. And getting it right means getting the details accurately so that you can create the best possible response. And so you'll see here that the skills are actually lined up right under those 2 categories, get it all, get it right. Under the get it all category, patient listening, asking open-ended questions, and tell me more about that. As you look at these 5 skills, I'm pretty sure you're probably applying some of them, but what you should be looking at is, which is one that I don't apply that often? Which is one that I could leverage a little bit more to create more powerful and positive impacts on teammates, clients, other people in my life that matter to me? Patient listening. This is simply about sitting back, resisting the urge to speak, and allowing the person to share his or her story in the way that he or she needs to share it. So often we jump in and we give them the word that they're searching for, or we summarize what they're saying before they've gotten there. And it may be because we're trying to be compassionate or trying to help solve problems. It also may be that we just realize we don't have a lot of time and we don't want to wait for them to get there. But as soon as we do that, we're back in subjective listening. We've hijacked the conversation. We've said, I don't want to take any more time to talk about this, so I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know so that I can get on to something else. That's subjective listening. That's hijacking the conversation. Remember, listening means making the conversation about the other person's situation and having it on their terms, not on yours. Really hard to do. And so for many of us, patient listening is a skill that we really don't do enough of. So observe yourself, observe your other people around you for the next week or 2, and see who's really being patient in their listening. And most of all, think about yourself. If you're not allowing the other person to say what they need to say, you're jumping in on the conversation and hijacking. Open-ended questions. These are really, really powerful questions, folks. These are the kinds of questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. They begin with who, what, when, where, why, and how. So for example, if you were to say to somebody, how did the meeting go? That's very different from saying, was it a good meeting? If you ask the person, was it a good meeting, you're going to get probably a yes or a no answer, and that's all you get. But if you say, how did the meeting go? They'll say something like, well, you know, it started off really well. I thought we were doing X, Y, Z, and we were having a great conversation about whatever, and then it really turned bad when so-and-so said X. See how much more information you get from an open-ended question than a yes or no question. And so if your typical way of asking questions are these closed-ended questions, yes or no, make sure you're sprinkling in some yes or no, open-ended questions, because that allows you to get it all.
You know, David, what's really interesting about this is in terms of having this active listening skill set, you know, someone could be complaining about, not complaining, or sharing their situation of not being able to convert leads. And an open-ended question was, well, how's it going for you? Or some of the ones you alluded to. Or subjective listening would be a good example, right? Of, did you follow my process?
Yes.
And where does that really leave somebody?
Yep. You know, when you throw out something like, did you follow my process? A, you've hijacked the conversation, right? You've said this conversation is now simply about whether you followed my process or not. and you're no longer listening, right? You've appointed yourself as the director of the conversation. And of course, that's not listening. That's what we might call assertion, which is, for another time.
I just want to share that as we go through these scenarios, for us to really think subconsciously, how many times have we actually done this to another person without even knowing? I'd be interested in the chat box who wants to have a be honest moment. Just hit yes if you've ever done something. I'll be the first one. I'll write yes. If anyone else would like to write yes too. Look, awareness is as important as implementation. So David, it's number 3.
Yep, number 3. Tell me more about that. If you don't use this particular technique or phrase, you should be using it. It's really, really important for 2 reasons. One, it's an honest question where you're seeking more information. And so it's not just about helping the person direct you to the part of the conversation that might have the most interest or value or is like the crux of the issue, but it validates to them that you are interested in spending time to help understand their situation. When you say, tell me more, what you're saying is, I'm willing to block out everything else in my life right now that's of importance to me so that I can hear more from you. And so this tell me more about that is a skill that you should be applying, not all the time, obviously, but when you've heard a lot of things in a particular story and you kind of want to sort out what piece might be like the most important to the speaker from the speaker's point of view, tell me more about that part of the story. I want to hear a little bit more. All of these skills help you get it all. And if you're mixing and matching these kinds of techniques in with the other things that you're doing, chances are you're going to get the whole story sooner rather than later. And once you have it all, then you're in a position to find the right response. Let's move over to the get it right side of the column. Getting it right has 2 important skills that both stand up as kind of like the things that you should be doing on a regular basis as well. First of all, clarifying. So often we hear from somebody else a phrase or an expression that makes sense to them, but could be interpreted in a number of different ways. Like, that was a no-brainer, or you know how Susan is. Well, the problem with that is if we try to just apply our own kind of assumption about what that means, sometimes they're going to be wrong. And so if you never ask someone to clarify what they mean by something, chances are you're making a misassumption some of the time. That's something that's very, very common. We just think that somebody else understands the phrase the same way we do, and we're going to be wrong. Chirag, I see you smiling a little bit there. Is something popping into your head on that one?
Yeah, it's just kind of how many like little aha moments you have as I just hear you speaking. David and I were talking about this before, how much personally this has just resonated with me. So many different points. So it's like, as you go through this, go back in that mental Rolodex of your head and your brain. And when you're connecting with people, your teammates, your friends, your family members, some people in the chat box said their kids, these are all opportunities, not just to make your business better, but to make your life better. I'm sure many people, along with myself sitting here, are having aha moments as you speak.
Yeah, so, all of these by themselves, each one is a powerful technique. And if you can put them all together and mix and match them in the right way at the right time, in the right situation, they can be extremely powerful and extremely valuable. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Let's talk about the last one, paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is, again, a very important technique that probably a lot of people don't do on a regular basis. Paraphrasing is simply taking a moment in the conversation to feedback or state what it is you've heard from the other person up to now. And it's really important to feedback both the thoughts and the feelings that you've captured from the person, not just the facts. Very often we say, oh, well, this happened and then this happened. I understand what happened. But if you're also alluding to how you understand the person felt about what happened, you're making a powerful connection to that person's experience of it. And so paraphrasing is often simply saying something like, let's say someone's told you a bit of a situation that they're facing about chasing down leads or whatever it might be, closing the sale. And they've told you a bit about it, and you want to pause at that moment just to make sure that you got it all right. You can simply say, can we just pause for a minute? I want to make sure I heard everything right before we continue further. What I heard you first say was XYZ, and that made you feel XYZ, and then I heard you say blah, 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 blah. Did I hear that right? And if you do this with somebody else, they're going to be so thankful that you've just proved to them that you were listening, because chances are if you were listening, you got 90% of it right. And so if you can say back to them what it is that you heard and how it is you heard them feeling about it, you've just demonstrated that you were listening. And even if you got one detail wrong or the other detail wrong, they'll tell you. They'll say, you know what, that little part of it I wasn't exactly frustrated. I was more irritated than frustrated. Oh, got it. Okay, you were irritated more than frustrated. Great, thank you. That part not only helps your understanding, but more importantly, it demonstrates to them that they have been heard. Extremely powerful technique.
You know, David, what's really interesting about this is I'll go client facing for the agents here. You know, you guys go on listing presentations and all the time you're talking to sellers. And what I want to give you the thought is, are you giving the presentation that you want to give, or are you asking the right questions and giving the presentation the seller wants? So if you ask the seller what's most important to them about the agent and company that represent them in the sale of the home, you'll hear about marketing, getting the best price, communication, what do you do differently? And I want you to write these words down and use them. What it sounds like is most important to you, or if I'm hearing you correctly, what would be most helpful to you is a clear understanding of how, or putting those statements ahead of what you're going to say, right? So it lets them know you're listening. So it sounds like is most important to you, Chris, is understanding the exact marketing plan I'll use to get you the best price for your home, along with the written communication plan I have on how we'll communicate throughout the process. Is that correct? And they said, yeah. But at that point, you're paraphrasing it, right? So before you're going from one place to the other, David, how helpful is it just to kind of check in, right? You get it all, you get it right, and then you're meeting the person where they are, which is what you were talking about in the last session, and actually having the conversation that the person wants to have, not the one you think they should have.
Yeah, this is all about whose agenda are you in. You know, you want to help the person. Maybe you just want to solve problems. Those are good things. Or maybe you just want to get this problem off of your desk so that you can focus on something else. But in all those cases, you know, you're not really meeting the client where he or she is, or the teammate where he or she is. And so there's nothing wrong with taking a quick 10-second check in the conversation to say, am I where you are? Am I understanding this? It's a totally different way of being listened to. And most of us don't experience it that much. But you'll know you're doing it well because the person will say to you, you're really good at listening. They will say, thank you for listening to me, which tells you they had a powerful experience of being heard. And this is where I'll remind you something I said earlier. If you never have someone tell you, thank you for listening, or you're a good listener, if you're not hearing that from other people from time to time, you're not listening well enough, period. And I'm going to challenge all of you to listen well enough so that you hear one of those two phrases every quarter or more. If you're not hearing that stuff, you're not impacting people powerfully enough, because when you do, they will tell you. They will say, thank you for giving me this experience. So last thing I want to say about these listening skills, as you look at them on paper, they don't look so transformative in life, but people will tell you who practice these things that they are absolutely transformational in how they can achieve what they want to achieve, and they are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. And I'll give you one example. In one of my programs, we had just gone through these particular skills, and one lady came up to me afterwards. She said, you know, David, I don't know if this stuff really is that powerful. And I said, well, you know, go out and practice it for a month until our next session. And she said, well, okay, I will. And this is where Chirag was talking earlier about going out and doing something that's a little uncomfortable for you, or something that you might not think that you need to do because you want to keep doing the things the way you always did. She happened to have an interview that month. And she said, David, can you talk me through this interview a little bit? And so we talked about it. And she was being interviewed in a field she had no experience with. She had come out of the political field. She had been offered this interview in a company that had nothing to do with her background. But she wanted to just kind of like see what it might be like. And I said, well, here's a great opportunity for you to apply those listening skills. Rather than talking about how great you are as a candidate, why don't you apply these listening skills to what the person gives you in the interview? And she said, well, okay, I'll try it. So guess what? She made that whole interview about actually asking questions, paraphrasing, tell me more about XYZ. And at the end of the interview, they offered her the job. Even though she had no experience in the field, nothing to offer, they both acknowledged she had no experience that would be applicable to this work at all. And they gave her a $100,000 job. And so she came into the next session to everybody. She said, guys, this stuff works. I got a $100,000 offer for something I had no business doing, but we both feel great about me actually taking that job. So this is how powerful and transformational it can really be.
And for all the type A people on this conversation, the thing you guys want to always be mindful of is the person asking all the questions is the one controlling the conversation.
Right.
Not the person talking. So if you go in a job interview, like David had suggested and shared that story, Literally, if you do this, the other person will probably start selling you on why you should work there. It's a very interesting concept, unless the person's been trained in sales. So let's kind of ground ourselves into our first learning point and scenario. And as we go into this, how many times have people on this call been disappointed by their team member or staff admin not doing the work that they wanted by the time they wanted it done? Let's drop your little message or scenario in the box. Of course, yes. Guys, share some specific examples if you can too. We'll call this scenario a good old-fashioned overwhelmed admin. You're leaving the office in 15 minutes for an important listing presentation, and you ask your admin to please give you the CMA that you had requested the day before. You could clearly tell that she's frustrated. She just blurts out, "I'm sorry, I forgot. I can't do everything." You are so annoyed at best, and you start to feel really angry since the seller specifically wanted this when you were going over there. Your admin offers to prepare the CMA and send it out via email as soon as possible so that you can be on time for your listing presentation. You realize that your admin is too flustered to prepare the CMA correctly, and you tell her that you'll do it yourself, asking her please to call the seller and to tell her you're running 15 minutes late. Has anyone ever got mad at somebody about something that wasn't done to later realize that something really bad was going on in their life, and then you're like, I'm really sorry for the way that I acted because I had no idea that that was going on? Anybody? Besides me? Yes, yes. Look, in life, everyone shows up differently. And in times in life, there's certain things that happen that obviously have us behave and perform in a way that's out of line and out of character. And as we talk about using this active listening skill set, get it all, get it right, there are a few things you're going to want to think through in this scenario, right? You need to really understand where your admin's coming from. And there's two different worlds that this is going to end up. Number one, by using this skill set, you're going to understand if this person genuinely had something happen to them or why that they're overwhelmed in the first place. Or number two, you're going to listen well enough to understand that this person shouldn't be part of your team, your culture, and it's just not working for you. So in going through doing this, right, don't blame somebody. Ask them. You know, I like using the word what specifically, you know, what specifically, Mr. or Mrs. Admin, happened where you felt overwhelmed knowing that this was a priority, it didn't get done? Or is something specifically going on in your life that affected your work? Being able to think about how you can dig in deeper and not being in that emotional state of anger. You know, how do you approach this, David? Any other thoughts before we go to the approach about how people should be thinking about this, right? Because generally the emotion here is anger, rage, disappointment, resentment. And those are all anger. Those are all situations that don't really lead to a positive conversation.
The only thing I'd add to that, Chirag, is alongside the anger that may be coming from, or frustration that may be coming from your teammate, could be fear. It could be that they are seeing that they're not particularly adequately, performing their duties, and they may be worried about that. They may be thinking, what is my boss going to think about this? Is my boss about ready to send me out the door? And maybe they also feel some regret. So it's not surprising if your first person is bringing you a situation that includes a whole bunch of different emotional elements to it. And probably alongside the anger and frustration, the other most important one to think about is that fear element. Just because they don't show it doesn't mean that it's not there. And if you can really look at it from their point of view, you may recognize that that's a big piece of it for them.
And the other part in thinking about this is, in coaching, a lot of times I'll hear this from the team leaders, and then I'll go and I'll actually talk to the admin. And the question is in communicating with the people, those three principles, right? Is the task clear? Is the deadline concise? And does the other person know exactly what's expected of them to do? And do they have the things to be successful, right? So think about this prior to your response, not your reaction. And in approaching the conversation, right? Recognize this is a situation for empathetic listening, right? Coming from a place of contribution and caring, and understand that if this is part of somebody's job, obviously it's not something they meant to do with malicious harm or intent, assuming this is the right person. So this is a point to listen and build deeper connections. Because look, how many people do we all know in our lives where there's been a problem and you've gone to somebody where they should have got mad at you, but they took the time to really listen to you, understand you, talk it through with you, and you could actually leave feeling good. I can't tell you how many chats we've had in the box. How do I get my team members to stay and not want to leave? Guys, this is the secret. It's culture, right? These things are all culture and the collaborative nature of being part of a team, right? So when problems happen, how you deal with them is what makes people feel good or not good, right? So think about every time when you've made a move. A lot of you, Compass was new, so a lot of you guys came here, right? What were those trigger events that your broker or previous brokerage did that made you want to come here, right? So when team members leave, there's generally a trigger event in the way a team leader or someone treated them that made them want to think about going somewhere, and they start having these go somewhere else, and having these ideas that the grass might be greener. So approach it with empathy. Keep asking questions so you get it all and get it right. Listen, if they didn't do this, obviously they did something else. And we have to work with them to understand how they're thinking through their job on a day-to-day basis. What did they think was more important than your CMA that was going to a client that specifically asked for it? What did they use the time for? Why did they use the time for? Why did they think that was important? These aren't questions that are commonly asked in a situation that goes wrong. But by doing this, you give somebody a space to grow and implement it. There are a couple phrases that we added onto the page. Now, I want David to talk a little bit about, in terms of implementing this, David, right? Assuming that's the right person, in an ideal outcome in this situation, how would the admin leave feeling after a good conversation of active listening from a team leader?
They would feel heard. They would feel validated, or that is accepted. And they would probably feel motivated or inspired by what happened in that interaction. And so if you're not getting that out of your own staff, then you can ask yourself, what am I doing that's not leading them to that place? For example, we talked about fear a minute ago. If someone is coming to you and part of what they're bringing into that space is fear, you need to provide some psychological safety for them, because otherwise nothing happens with that particular fear. And it could be a very simple solution. You could say something like, look, I'm not happy with what happened just here, right here. But I want you to know you're a valuable member of my team, and I want to work with you to do your best work here and stay here with me. If you could just say that, then that helps them understand that they are valued by you, even though they may not value the activity that they just did right or wrong. And so they can walk away feeling safe and comforted. And from that, then they would be much more motivated and willing to continue the fight.
Before we go to our expired change, I want you guys to be grounded in this reality. We talk about productivity, profitability, and efficiency. And ask yourself this question: if your team members don't feel comfortable coming to you when things are going wrong or they're challenged, do you think they're at their maximum productivity, efficiency, or profitability for your team? The answer is no. This is the environment you create. When you're wondering, how does this show up in my business? Remember back to session 1, the value of your time. All the people in here that wrote, they give me the task back. There's something deeper there. There's something missing. And the sooner you can figure out what's missing by sitting down and having the right conversations and asking the right questions. So that brings us to our inspired change. What are 3 situations in your business where you can implement active listening to solve a problem and improve productivity? I'll give you guys a few minutes to put this into your book. And if anyone would like to share an actual situation that they feel they could do based on what we've just talked about, please put it in the chat box. David, as they go through and they write down their scenarios, it's so easy when you start thinking about the get it all, get it right. No matter where you are, this really applies, and it can really be transformative. Think about all of us that have kids and friends and the challenging situations. And you're thinking about at times when you show up places where you're excited to say something and you hijack the conversation in subjective listening. Think about how many times in business people come to you with a challenge, just looking to you for a solution to their challenge, and you don't use active listening and you hijack the conversation.
It's so true. It happens every day in business, and it happens every day in our personal lives. Think about how many times you regret you handled a situation with your significant other. The person was coming to you for something and you applied something that you thought should be interjected into the conversation when maybe that wasn't even what they were looking for. You know, someone comes to you for validation, or they just come to you for like companionship, and you actually give them an evaluation or a judgment. This is not what they wanted at all. And so they walk away feeling like, I wasn't heard. I didn't get what I wanted out of that particular conversation. And it's too bad, because every interaction we have with another human being is an opportunity to build a stronger, more authentic, and more productive relationship.
You know, it's interesting you say that. So Steve Irizarry's on here, and he's in our coaching community. And we were talking about in role playing, practicing active listening, asking better questions. So he started practicing on his wife. And now his wife says to him all the time, man, Steve, you're such a good listener. Thank you so much. I'll have him drop a comment in here, but it truly is remarkable how this stuff works. So look, I think for everyone, you need to realize that as your business scales and grows, it's your ability to think through things differently, apply new skill sets, and learn as a leader how to get the most out of your team. And that's what this is all about. It's giving you these simple skills every day. Now, who wrote this in here about on a listing presentation? Bear with me. I think Lisa Bell. I think this would be Lisa Powerful and listing presentation. Lisa, this is the single most important skill you can use on listing presentations. I start, and I recommend every person start the conversation with, you know, I wrote down one really important question. Do you mind if I share what's most important to you about an agent and company that represents you in the sale of this home? And listen to what they say and have the conversation they want to say. And like, whether it's a commission objection, what do you do differently? Being able to ask questions, get it all, get it right, and applying these 5 skills to it will convert more sales, whether it's with people, with clients, with buyers. This stuff is universally applied. So when we're talking about situations and you leave here today and you go back to your business, your life, your cell phone, your emails, start being mindful of how this shows up in your business and the opportunities you have. To our next learning point, sharing feedback with teammates. Feedback is a nice word for performance management. So if you say to your team member, hey, we're going to review your performance, a lot of them have stuff under their iceberg. It could bring up feelings of tension, inadequacy. If they don't like conflict, they could be combative. And if you're saying to your teammates, hey, you know, this is an opportunity for both of us to share feedback and figure out a way that how we can improve your performance and help you meet your goals, that's a different conversation and a context. David?
Thank you. Yeah, feedback stands side by side with listening as the way that performance management is delivered. So we've talked about emotional intelligence up to now. We've talked about listening. The other key piece of the performance management process is feedback. That is, how do we share information with another that allows the peak performance to emerge? In the most general sense, what is feedback? Feedback is information that one uses to make a particular decision to do this or do that. For example, the gas gauge in your car is a feedback device. It doesn't tell you whether you need to get gas or not, but it provides you information that you can use to make a decision about whether to stop for gas or not. In the business setting, feedback is all about information that you or your teammate can use to decide how to perform either the same or differently. When we're talking about performance management, what we're talking about is an ongoing conversation between you and your team member that eventually allows that person to perform at his or her peak level in accordance with whatever standards or expectations have previously been set. And so we want to give you a couple of important guidelines for how you can provide feedback to people going forward. There's more than this, but these are 2 that are really, really important. And if you're not providing feedback along the lines of these 2 guidelines, you're not helping your own teammate have the opportunity to perform ideally. So let's look at what this is. First feedback guideline, being specific versus general. General feedback is information that is general in nature. It tells them something about how you view the situation, but it might not give them enough detail for them to understand how they could do things differently. So for example, you have a couple examples here. You need to be more effectively communicating your value proposition to your pitch, as opposed to your pitch wasn't very good. If you were to say to your teammate, your pitch wasn't very good, okay, that's something. They get an idea that you're not quite satisfied with it, but they have no idea exactly what part of it you're referring to. And therefore, it's hard for them to make a decision about how they might do it differently going forward. Another example, I think you could be more effective if we work on time blocking and prioritizing tasks, as opposed to what you might say, your time management skills are really bad. Not only is that kind of, might sound harsh and might sound judgmental to people, but if you say your time management skills are bad, they don't know what to do with that. They're already managing their time in the way that they think is best, given whatever else is going on in their life. That's why they did it that way. But if you say to them something more specific, then perhaps they can think about how they could make an alteration to that particular practice. Finally, there were a few Zillow calls that came in and you didn't answer or call any of them back today, versus you didn't prospect enough. Now, it may be that the summary statement is you didn't prospect enough, but having them recognize what you're talking about here is how they respond to the Zillow calls gives them much more information to use to think about how they might do things differently.
Hey, David.
Chirag, any comments about that guideline? Yeah.
You know what's interesting about this, right? If I was saying this to David prior, I said what I've learned even deeper in this is behind every statement and word that somebody says is a thought, a feeling, and a previous experience that they're bringing into it. And becoming aware of that will change the nature of the conversation. So if I look at this general, right, it's kind of your editorial view on what happened. Your pitch isn't very good. Your time management skills are really bad. You didn't prospect enough today, right? So it's like asking those open-ended questions like, how do you think your pitch should get better? You know, you need more effective, so start looking at this in terms of the generalization is literally taking a position or passing a judgment on how somebody's actions are. And if you found it effective, if someone passes a judgment on how you're doing things, are you open to feedback and having a conversation, or do you become combative and defensive? I want everyone to think about that. David?
Yeah, we're going to talk more about that in the next session, but you should jot down a note right now that performance management is not just about telling them what you think, it's asking them what they think. And you can actually get people to perform more effectively sometimes by asking them how they feel about something or how they think they could do something differently rather than simply telling them. Also, if you sometimes ask a question about how do you think you could do this better, you stimulate in them, you kind of stimulate the muscles for them to think through how they're bringing themselves to their business and how they might do it better rather than simply giving them something, right? You know the old saying, teach a man to fish, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for his lifetime. That bringing in the questioning piece of it is an important piece that we'll talk a little bit more about later. Second guideline we want to share with you today, really important here. Make sure that the feedback that you are giving them is focused around actions and behaviors, not about them as a person. It's really important. When you judge the person, what they feel often is attacked and they forget about what the details are. And if you've ever had any kids, there's some advice out there about raising kids, which is criticize the behavior, not the child, because we hear it so completely differently. Here are a couple of examples. I see you struggling to manage multiple things at the same time. Very different from saying you're not a good employee. The person is very likely to conflate the statement, you're not a good employee, with you're not a good person. And how invalidating can that be? Second example, you stood firm with the client's complaint and helped turn his thinking around. Instead of, good job with the client. You know, that's fine. And we're talking about positive things as well as negative things here. But again, it's about the action and the behavior, not about the person per se. Third, you did a great job focusing on 123 Main Street and getting the home under contract. And at the same time, did not follow up with the buyers who were not interested. You are not great at following up. So there's a couple pieces of feedback in there, but again, it's focused exclusively on the behavior or action, not on the person as a human being.
And
Now, Chirag is, yep, go ahead, Chirag.
When having these conversations with your teammates, let's think about framework, right? Number one, you want to approach this with what's going well. You know, like say we're talking about online leads, which is a very reoccurring theme amongst our group here today. So you could say, what are some wins or what are some things that are going well with the Zillow leads you've got? Let them share this with you, right? What are some challenges that you've had with the Zillow leads? And you know what they're going to say. They're not good. They're not pre-qualified, so on and so forth. You know, and then ask them what they think too, right? Like, so it sounds like you think the leads are bad. Well, what do you think you could change? The quality of the leads or the way that we communicate with them? ask them questions, right? Let their opinions be heard and walk them down the process of getting them to the result you want with them coming up with the conclusion themselves. That is a good way to do feedback. And another thing that you realize is if you've asked someone all these questions and they still can't come to a logical conclusion while you're listening and presenting the right questions, open-ended, getting them to think, then you have to evaluate if these people are the right fit for your team or if you should move on. Felicia had a question. Should we sit down with agents on our team at least once a month and ask them about how they feel they need help with right now, and then coming up with a plan to help them with this? Then quarterly, we can give them our feedback on what we think. So Felicia, we have David, what's it? 5-5-5-30.
5-5-30-30.
5-5-5-30-30. So we have an actual process for this that we'll get to in a later session. And yes, having a plan is important. So part of this is Dahlia had wrote, this is out of parenting books. And in some ways, our team members and our staff are kind of like our kids, and they look at us as parents. We're supposed to have all the answers. So the more you could find structure around what you do. When I talk to team leaders, they tell me their challenges. I talk to team members. One of the number one things every team member says, I love my team member. They're great at what they do. This is why I joined the team. But Chirag, can you please help them get more structure around my job and how it's explained to me and what's expected of me? Remember, guys, motivations, expectations. So to start off this performance review, before you get into the nitty-gritty, let's go back to something we learned in one of the original sessions. If you sat down with each employee and you did no talking, you asked them 3 questions. I just want us to re-engage on what are your motivations for joining this team? Question number 1. Question number 2 is, what are your expectations of me as a team leader? A handful of people sent me messages to David and I about doing this, and the amount of clarity that they got was incredible. And if anyone wants to share what that's been like for them, I encourage you to share it with the other people in the group who might not have done that. And the third one is, and this is going to be really hard for people with a type A personality to do, what disappointments have you experienced being on this team in the last 6 to 12 months? So if you know what motivates them, you know what's expected of you, and you know where they've been let down, it is very easy for you to come up with a proactive plan to meet them where they are, get it all, and get it right. David?
Last thing I'll say about this before we get into the kind of the next point is, it's really important for you to see the feedback discussion as a two-way collaboration rather than simply the boss imposing something in a one-way direction going down. Many team leaders lament the fact that they say, my team member isn't motivated enough or doesn't have an ownership kind of mindset for my team. Well, guess what? How can they have an ownership mindset if you're not giving them the opportunity to take some kind of ownership in the conversation? And so if your feedback and performance management dialogue is built around, let's find ways to collaborate, we need to exchange data and information and feedback in 2 directions, then absolutely they see that they have a stake in the business because you're giving them a stake in the conversation. And so it's really important as you think about what this dialogue and performance management process will be for you, that it's a 2-way street, not 1-way.
Go to our quick inspired change. What questions would you ask your team members to help them realize that they need to practice to convert more leads, right? If you start talking about this and our learning point, and I think we've covered a lot of this in our actual natural dialogue, when your team members come to you and they're like, well, I'm not converting enough leads, right? So if you think about it, team leaders are data-driven and track conversions in the bottom line. But we know in real estate that it's not just about numbers. There's a lot of thoughts, feelings, and things that go into these conversations. So what are some questions that you can ask your team members when they're not converting online leads? Think about that, write that down, put a couple things in the chat box. We have this for you guys as scenario number 2. And I want to make sure that we leave adequate time for Q&A here. I think what I want you guys to do is realize that someone not converting online leads is not a conscious choice for most people. Most people came to a team to make money, and a lead was a driving factor. And I ask people all the time, what can change? The people that click boxes online, or the skill set that you have in the way you show up in these conversations? Start thinking about that, right? Ethan, are you earning the money you'd like? Yes, bingo. Would they like to do role playing to help them with their comfort level? See, a lot of guys, go in the chat box and look at what other people that are doing this are getting at. Ethan's a great example. His team role plays 5 days a week. Their conversion has gone up considerably. They role played every single day through COVID, but prior to that, some of them were challenging him about the leads, the quality of the leads. You know, do they really work? Should we be marketing somewhere else? You know, and marketing, I said to an agent the other day, no amount of marketing will solve not having the adequate skills to converse with somebody. So put a couple more thoughts down. Great questions here in the box. And the think, approach, and implement. Guys, just think about this. This is not what the people want. So clearly, just as you're frustrated as your money's being wasted, they're frustrated too that they're not getting the result that they want to get. And if you're on a larger team and you're seeing other people do it, naturally your inkling is they have better leads. How come it's working for them? Maybe this doesn't work for me. This is another area where you could start thinking about people's iceberg and what's underneath them. Approach this with empathetic listening. Really get down to it. And look, there are people that can be helped, and there are other people that just literally have no business converting online leads. And as a leader, we need to know who our people are and what their skill sets are, and to put them in a position to succeed. There are people that are great at open houses and are terrible with online leads. There are people that are great at converting online leads and just terrible at open houses. They don't have the patience for it. So think about who the people are, how you can meet them where they're at, and create an environment where they're open to sharing feedback with you.
Chirag, I noticed in the chat box, Livia said, interestingly, using active listening with one of my agents that always seemed disconnected has made her take a much more active role now, operating as if her stake on the team is highly valuable to her. That's a success story. You know, when you can transform something on the team from where it was to where it is, calculate the value of that over time. I mean, that's dollars in the bank.
And Livia, I know her personally. I hope this is the one team member we spoke about, because if it is, like, you should just have a big smile, give yourself a hug, pat yourself on the back. That is absolutely remarkable. So listen, this is my favorite part of every presentation, learning from reality, where we really want to ground ourselves into the actual situation. Yes, Livia said yes. Ground ourselves into the actual situations that are going on every day in your business where we can move the needle. So look, we have 10 minutes. We'll stay a little bit later. So let's say 15 minutes. We have 15 minutes to answer anyone's questions. If you want to do a performance review, how do you be a better listener? Do you have a challenge with a client? Put your name in the chat box. We'll have our team promote you to a panelist, and let's have some fun here. And remember, when you're asking a question, ask questions that aren't so specific to you, but ones that carry across the entire group. So who will be our first brave volunteer? Don't be shy. Should I get my phone and play the Jeopardy music, David? The question is, who has a question? Can you role play paraphrasing around feelings that you're picking up on? Okay, Amy, can we promote Amy to a panelist, please? Is Amy a panelist now?
I think I am.
Hey, Amy, how are you?
Hey guys, how are you?
Good. Where are you located?
We're in Jupiter, Florida.
Nice. So tell us a little bit more about what would you like to role play?
So, you know, oftentimes I pick up on frustration and, people get to the end of their rope and they start saying, I can't, or this doesn't work, or that kind of thing. And to point out that someone seems frustrated or irritated sometimes sort of compounds that feeling and makes folks defensive. So I'm just wondering, I love the idea of paraphrasing to show that you understand. But I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on how to delicately paraphrase on emotions that they're showing, but not actually stating to you.
So you could be the person and I'll be the agent.
All right.
Go.
One of the common ones we get is, I'm just giving up 50% of my commission. I could go out and spend the money on marketing and, keep all of the commission that I'm receiving.
What it sounds like is that you're very frustrated because you feel that your business could be more profitable. Am I hearing that correctly, Amy?
Yeah, I'm working so hard and, I'm just giving away money.
I could completely understand that feeling of giving things away is very unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
So
I see what you're doing.
So, in the words, you said, in hearing you correctly, Amy, the words giving something away, giving implies just handing something over without getting something back, where it looks like you're looking for something to be more reciprocal.
It does. And so my role has traditionally been to remind them of all the values of having an admin that you can call on anytime you need them, having marketing done for you, having leads provided to you. But hearing the coaching session today, I'm taking a defensive stance, and those things still need to be communicated. But I think that if I used some of the questions that you just used to validate feelings beforehand, they might be more open to hearing my message after.
We'll go through this, and what I want to point away is the whole takeaway, your attachment to it, right? Like under your iceberg is you've worked incredibly hard. You pay for an admin, you pay for leads, you show up for them all the time. That's not what you want to show because that takes away from them, right? So now we'll keep going it. I would say giving away sounds really frustrated. So, Amy, let me ask you, when you joined the team, what was your primary motivation for joining a team versus working on your own?
Well, I didn't know what I was doing, so I needed to get my feet wet and learn the business.
You need to get your feet wet and learn the business, and that makes sense. So you feel you're at a point where you've learned the business, and that it might make more. And this is 100% okay, Amy. It might make more sense for you to work on your own. So, what things do you value as being part of this team, and what things would you value about maybe going on your own?
Can we pause?
Yeah.
So, often when we get to this point in the conversation, I get a sense that there's some backpedaling because lots of compliments that contradict what I've been hearing previously start to come out. And I also don't quite know how to, I want to say, like, do you really feel that way? Because you weren't just saying that.
What's a nice way to say that?
What's that?
Is you're going to say, I really appreciate the compliments and the values that you're sharing that the team offers. What's really important to me, though, is that you had this feeling of giving away, that we understand that feeling, that we acknowledge that feeling, and we get to a place that you feel comfortable with at the end of this conversation. So what specifically has happened over the last 30 days that has made you feel this way?
I send out questions and I'm in a hurry and I might not get answers for 10, 15 minutes.
Got it. And so what you're saying is you need real-time support.
Yes.
And since we're talking about what you would express, Amy, was that you might feel better off working on your own. And if you weren't part of a team, where would you look for that support then?
Touche.
David?
Yeah, I hope that you were all observing that Chirag was doing. He was applying a couple of the skills, not just paraphrasing, but was also kind of using some open-ended questions so that he can get to the heart of the matter. It's really important to think that when you're trying to understand where the other person is coming from, that you are engaging the feelings as well as the facts. And in this particular case, a couple of simple phrases you can use is, start off by saying something like, I'm really happy you brought this to me, because that by itself is a little bit disarming. It helps the person realize that he or she is not going to be in a battle for whatever the situation is. I'm really glad you brought this to me. It's important to me to hear it. And then you could say something like, I'm getting the sense that you're frustrated and a little worried. Am I off base on that? And so you're feeding back, you're paraphrasing what it is that you're sensing in them, even if they didn't say that. Now, the hope is, of course, that they'll speak honestly with you. And if they won't speak honestly with you, then they don't quite feel safe enough to do so in this setting. And you have a little bit more work to do to create that psychological safety in the relationship. But simply by saying, I'm getting the sense that you are blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And use the words that are on the vocabulary list that we gave you. This is where you need to pull out that list and use it, because that's the one that'll help you get to the source of where they are. Another way you can say it is, I'm getting the sense that you're both frustrated and irritated by this. Which one would you say is more accurate for you? They might say, well, you know, I'm really just frustrated. It's not like I'm really angry about it. I'm just frustrated. And you say, okay, got it. You're frustrated. That's clarifying where it is that they are on that map of emotion. Mm-hmm. And by understanding that, sometimes you'll bring them to understanding where they are, not just yourself.
I like the idea of pairing a word like frustrated with worried, because when people come at us, we tend to see the more intense outward reaction, yes, and not the ones that they're sort of, if they're honest with themselves, are kind of the root of the outward reaction.
We said this before, and it bears repeating. Put a note in your workbook. The anger column is linked to the fear column. We always call the anger column the secondary emotion. 90% of the time behind the anger is the fear. Like when the mother sees the kid rush out into the street without looking for cars either way, and the mother goes out to the kid and starts shaking the kid. Didn't I tell you 100 times, don't run out in the street, you get killed that way. The outward expression is anger, but what's the real expression? Fear. She's scared to death the kid's gonna get killed. And so this is how fear often comes out as anger. And if we can just remember, draw like a connecting line or something on your workbook there. The fear column is almost always tied to the anger column. And if you can get the anger as well as where the fear might be that's sourcing it, you're doing yourself and your teammate a tremendous service.
What a great example. So I give you, look, this is like the last thought I'd leave you with too, Amy, is validate however they feel, right? It is very hard as a team leader. Listen, guys, carefully. When you know you're offering a lot, they're not using the resources, and they tell you, I don't know why I'm giving all this up, your immediate reaction is like, are you seriously kidding me? Like, really? Right? Like, they don't realize it. So, you know, part of this is we always tell people is, do you have a clearly defined written value proposition, right? And for a lot of people, putting things in writing versus living them in their brain and all these conversations, they don't get it, right? There's one team on here that I call the all-inclusive resort, where literally all you have to do is sell real estate. And the question that I have every week is, how come they're not productive? Because they literally don't have to do anything else, right? But do the team members understand what they're getting, right? It's like, if you put $10 in a jukebox, you want to know how many songs you're going to get to play back out of those $10, right? So the other thing is, when people are hearing this, is your value proposition clearly defined, right? Do they really know what they're paying for? And is that okay with them? So
I guess there's the pitfall of, because it's so clear in your head, you just assume everybody else knows, right? So would you suggest, even for existing agents, you know, putting a written value proposition in front of them? Or
so I would put your value proposition with other things that David will probably piggyback on, like mission, values, the benefits of being on the team. And look, most team leaders are always looking for better team leaders, right? And when you start defining what you offer on your team and people come in buying into those values, buying into that culture, you have a completely different team, because it's people that have a clear understanding of what they're getting from you, right? Like what this is, what this isn't, what I do, what you do, what nobody does, right? Like those types of things in there can be really helpful. And helping team members understand, like, if you have a shared admin and I worked on your team as a buyer's agent, what does the admin do for me, right? You know how many team leaders come to me and team members keep asking me what my personal assistant will do for them? Well, do they know it's your personal assistant, or do they think it's for everybody? Mm-hmm. David?
Yeah, being clear with your team about what's the context of your relationship, that's the values the organization holds, that's the beliefs that the organization may hold, and that's the mission of the organization. And if you just go out there and Google beliefs for values, or beliefs for Google, or values for Facebook, It's all up there on the website somewhere. You need to do the work as a leader to clarify what your values are and what your beliefs are and what your mission or your purpose is as an organization. And you need to make sure that your teammates understand it as you do. If you're doing that, you're giving them a great reference point for how they should show up in the business.
Great, thank you.
All right, we'll do one more. Who wants to go next? Thank you, Amy. And when you have your written values, please send them to us. We'll review them and give you some feedback.
Sure.
Wow, David, the chat box was very active. Everyone had a lot to say, but nobody wants me put in the spot.
I think there's a little fear coming up in some people's icebergs right now.
Yeah, I find this very fascinating. This is live coaching. It doesn't cost you any money. I promise you the people in the group will not think of you differently. One more person. There's 59 people here. Anybody? Going once? Going twice? Sold. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of like a recap today, right? Like, how do people use the active listening mindset? What are 3 bullet points, David?
Active listening mindset. You need to use active listening anytime a particular outcome is really important to you. And if you're not using listening in any of those situations, whether it's solving a problem with a teammate, solving a problem for a client, or other ways that you might want to grow the business, perhaps even team up with somebody else to create a collaborative response, you're missing the opportunity to create a powerful result for yourself and your business.
Perfect. And look at those 5 skills, right? Go back to your book, look at those 5 skills, and identify one situation, whether it's with a team member, a client, or someone in your life, that you could use each one of those skills and watch how it changes the experience for the other person. David?
And one way to apply all that is pick one of the skills. If there's one of those skills out of 5 that you don't really use too much, spend the next 2 weeks trying to use that skill and strengthen your muscles there. Because chances are you're using 2 or 3 or maybe 4 of those, but also chances are you're not using one. And when you can mix and match them, that's where the power and magic comes from.
Exactly. Now our favorite thing, performance management. So as they're going into these conversations, and we go deeper into this each week and we tie it all together, if they are going to have a conversation, David, and a situation comes up, what is the big takeaway for today?
Main takeaway is a performance management conversation is a 2-way collaborative conversation designed to increase effectiveness. You want to make it 2-way, you want to make it collaborative. And we're going to talk more about how to do that next time. But if you can keep those 2 points in mind, you're setting yourself up well for these kinds of conversations.
And guys, don't remember all those general thoughts like your pitch was bad. That's your feeling about what happened. Really be in tune with that. And before you have these conversations, play them out in your head, kind of map out what the questions are, understand the dialogue and the flow of the conversation, and do not attack the other person. What we can all learn from Amy's example is under our iceberg as a team leader is a lot of pride and a lot of work to what's got us here. And understanding how to communicate that effectively and efficiently with another person is a learned skill. Second is when people are doing things that are not in line with your mission, your values, and your brand, take a step back, allow them to be heard, allow their feelings to be okay, regardless of how much they don't make sense. If you try to tell somebody how to feel, you will never have a productive conversation. So look, guys, this is putting it together, right? We've talked about stuff from roles, responsibilities, which is motivations, expectations, and disappointments, right? We've talked about emotional intelligence. We've talked about active listening. This is how it's all coming together. So here's your opportunity between this week and in office hours to practice what you do, practice what you say, practice how you show up for other people. We're going to send a feedback survey after this. Your feedback's been incredibly helpful for improving the experience for everyone. So we look at every comment, we take it very seriously. So the survey will go out right after. Please take the 60 seconds it takes to do it. David?
Yeah, over the next week and maybe even longer, observe how you're giving feedback to others. Are you making it personal or are you focusing on action behavior? Are you focusing on something specific or are you keeping it general? Observe yourself and observe others, and it could probably be really eye-opening for you. Stick with it, folks. This is like daily practice work. It's not something that we just talk about in a class like this and then, forget about for a week. It's daily practice stuff, and it's easy to do.
And if you want to practice, if you have a friend, a roommate, a brother, a sister, a mom, a dad, ideal candidates are your spouses. go ahead and practice this stuff at home. And here's another thing to kind of tune your awareness in. When you're in these situations with other people, how do people give you feedback? I find the fastest way to change is realizing how people treat us, right? Like what happens like when you go to a restaurant, how the waiter or waitress treats you. Are you really trying to recreate that same type of experience for somebody else, whether it's good or bad? So listen, guys, keep showing up, keep believing in yourself, keep being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And thank you for investing the time to go on this journey with us. And we'll see everybody next week. Have a good one.
See you on Monday.